Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where there is a real tug-of-war developing between the United States and the rest of the world. Well, mostly China. As to what movies Hollywood should be making. Take the two big movies of the weekend. The newbie, Transformers: The Last Night, and holdover, Wonder Woman. Transformers: The Last Night is the lowest stateside opening yet for the franchise, yet it had one of the biggest overseas openings yet for the franchise. And it would have had the biggest if not for a very unusual and worrying 31% drop in China from Saturday to Sunday. Maybe this tug of war won't last that long after all. But anyway, that still gives Transformers 5 a global debut of $265 million. Not terribly behind Transformers 4, which came in at $301. But that overseas number is just a godsend considering the domestic number. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman is close to being the top-grossing DCEU film domestically. That is a very big deal. But overall, it's being held at the back of the pack because of moderate overseas box office. One could argue that's because it's the character's big screen debut, right? There's a lack of familiarity. But then how do you explain Suicide Squad doing so well overseas? You could say, oh, it's the Joker, but Jared Leto's Joker infamously was cut out of most of the movie. And I think it was more about Harley Quinn, who was also a new character making her silver screen debut. Suicide Squad might also be more of a visual pick, which perhaps does a better job tearing down the language barrier, right? Do you want to watch people in these amazing, colorful costumes make jokes in Vogue? Or do you want to have a very interesting discussion about women and World War I, right? Right? It's like, I can see where there might be a problem there. And imagine if Suicide Squad had actually had action scenes. And to be fair, if Wonder Woman had had more action scenes. Perhaps if Wonder Woman had more action scenes, it might have done better globally. I also think there's a family film component. We'll get into Wonder Woman in depth in just a little bit. But anyway, sequels for both Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad should be big. So let's date them already, Warner Brothers. I'm thinking maybe at Comic-Con. Also, on that note, perhaps Wonder Woman should appear in Gotham City Sirens. I'm liking the idea. Even just for one action sequence, to have Harley Quinn and Wonder Woman square off, as they already have done in the Justice League versus Suicide Squad comic and in Injustice 2. Particularly that last one, quite popular. Actually, very cool. If you don't know what happens there, play the game. But anyway, this would be a marquee fight that I think would be too good to pass up. In fact, if I were, Warner Brothers or the DCEU, executive team, I'd be demanding it right now. Story elements be damned. Heroes fighting other heroes' villains. Women the most popular characters in a cinematic universe. Real Old Testament stuff, Mr. Mayor. But anyway, back to domestic versus foreign box office. How bad does domestic box office need to get before foreign box office isn't enough to save a movie? Or are studios okay making movies exclusively for foreign audiences, right? I think it's a little embarrassing already at this point, right? To see such rejection of a movie like we've seen stateside with The Mummy and now Transformers. And even China with that big drop Saturday to Sunday, very unusual. Perhaps China's kind of like on fast forward as a developing movie audience. They might already be approaching where the United States finds itself in terms of what they're willing to pay for and what they're, that's the thing. It used to be like, I'll take a pass, but there's like kind of like, I even saw a comment with people over the weekend being like, let's shut down Transformers like we did with Fantastic Four and The Mummy. Let's just let Hollywood know we don't want this. And, that's something like the Rotten Tomatoes has taken on that element a little bit. I think that's very scary for Hollywood. Before it used to be like, I just personally am going to pass. But now it's like, I don't want this to exist at all, even if I don't watch it. So that's very, very interesting indeed. And what this becomes tricky is, you're dealing with opinions here, right? I mean, I liked Fate of the Furious. A lot of people liked Fate of the Furious, and it made $1 billion overseas. I thought the first half of Transformers was fun, stupid fun, but then I agreed that the ending was just absolutely terrible. And that we all agree that Wonder Woman, although I am starting to see some people say, like for instance, in my Apes review, I had major problems with the second the second 2/3 of the film. And I'm seeing a number of people being like, well, Wonder Woman, you liked Wonder Woman and that was garbage. Apes is so much better. So it begins. But anyway, most people think that Wonder Woman was really good, yet nobody overseas is interested in that in a big way. So it's really hard to say, that's why I like box office so much to evaluate a movie's success, because it's really hard to argue definitively what's good and what's bad. Now, there is some question. Gal Gadot is pro-Israel because, of course, she's Israeli, and she did serve in the Israeli army, as do all Israelis. And because of that, the movie was banned in like 1 or 2 markets because it was considered that it would be very pro-Israeli military, not only because of Gal Gadot's personal comments, but because, she embodies this Israeli military might in some ways, or at least it could be seen that way. But she wasn't banned in any major movie market, so I can't see that having an impact. But I do know that there's been like some burgeoning anti-Semitism abroad, although a lot of Hollywood talent is Jewish, but not to the extent and not as publicly as Gal Gadot, who, celebrates Jewish holidays. She Instagrams about it. She very much, that's a part of who she is publicly. I haven't seen that narrative popping up in any foreign media, though, but it might be something that's like in the depths of the internet, but is still having an impact. So I'd be very curious as to why you think Wonder Woman isn't doing as well overseas, particularly if you live overseas, if you could give us some insight into that. And since we're already talking about Wonder Woman, let's break that movie down first before we go back to Transformers. Now, as everybody knew, it surpassed Mamma Mia this weekend to become the top worldwide grosser ever directed by a woman. And as I said, there's still an asterisk on that. Okay, whatever. But topping the DCEU, even domestically, is a really big deal. And she will do that by next weekend. That is exciting. And one of you asked me, and you said over the weekend, do you think that women and the LGBT community are what's really powering Wonder Woman to these box office heights? And I said, well, I think part of the hold of Wonder Woman is that audiences, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore the movie, right? I think more and more people are like, maybe I should see it. It continues to be like number 2. It has amazing holds week to week. It's a thing. I should see it in theaters. So I think that's happening. But I do think that those two groups are propping up the movie to a large degree. But that causes a potential problem for Wonder Woman, because if it's successful because of those two groups, well, those groups demand more representation in the sequel. They'd be like, well, we were responsible for making Wonder Woman the phenomenon that it was, so I want to see elements, reflecting our two special interest groups in the sequel. Yet, Wonder Woman was very successful, the first one, because it was so mainstream and did not cater to those special interest groups. And yet they still showed up. So I would hope that Jeff Johns, John Berg, Patty Jenkins, I heard some of you saying Alan Heinberg might not return as the screenwriter, but still, and also, by the way, those are the two groups that made the movie, Alan Heinberg being an openly gay man and Patty Jenkins being a woman. But I would hope that they would realize that they didn't cater to special interest groups, and that was a good thing to do, and that it didn't hurt the movie. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see where Wonder Woman places in the year-end rankings, domestically and worldwide. And I'm going to predict that it's going to be somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be at the top. Disney still continues to dominate those spots. And so Warner Brothers still has some work to do. I do think they need more. I've been saying this for a while. They really need a lot more action. When you think about like Civil War, so many big action sequences and really well done. They need more action in the DCEU. Also, though, they need to be more family films. Wonder Woman is the most family film that they've produced yet, but I think still it could be even more family friendly. Like, for instance, Guardians of the Galaxy. I think like a lot of people took kids to see Wonder Woman because they're like, oh, this is an important movie. It's a good example of a female hero, but it wasn't like a family night out in a fun way, I think. Maybe it ended up being that way, but I don't know if that was always the intention. So I think if they move to some of her classic villains like Cheetah or Circe, they might get that. But again, you don't want to skew too heavily female and become feminist either. It's really tough to do, which is why the first Wonder Woman's so amazing, that they walked that tightrope so well. Now, speaking of studios and embarrassment, all eyes are on Paramount, except at the multiplex. No one's seeing their movies. I mean, look at this lineup for this year. Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage, Ghost in the Shell, Baywatch, and now Transformers: The Last Night. The one franchise they had left after Star Trek, which they also let die of neglect. So that's right, I'm talking with Paramount. They have problems creatively with their marketing department, but I think perhaps most of all, an inability to read the changing marketplace. That's really a problem. And while China saved XXX and Transformers, it couldn't or wouldn't save Ghost in the Shell or Baywatch. Now, they've just hired a new head of the studio, former Fox chief Jim Giannopoulos, and he certainly has his work cut out for him. But he's done a very good job so far. He's off to a promising start, having just sealed the deal for David Fincher to direct World War Z 2. I loved that first movie. I think I have high hopes for the sequel. I think it's going to be great. Talk about a very forward-thinking film. I always describe World War Z as like the Vanity Fair of zombie action movies. It's great. Vanity Fair, such a good magazine. All right, so anyway, and don't think you're getting away scot-free, Mark Wahlberg. I see you there. Wahlberg is having also a terrible year, and he really needs Daddy's Home 2 to deliver. And just like I recently said, Michelle Pfeiffer was kind of like the ghost of Margot Robbie's future, and Margot Robbie should really think about that as she shapes her own career. I think Dwayne Johnson should consider Mark Wahlberg a cautionary tale in terms of being overexposed and maybe a little bit too one-note. All right, so as for the rest of the top 10 at the box office this weekend, Cars 3 dropped on par with Cars 2 for its second weekend, showing that perhaps now that it's a trilogy, that's always like, that used to be the big thing. Like if you got a trilogy, you made it as a franchise. But now, of course, you should be able to go on forever, ideally. But I think with Cars, Disney Pixar, the whole point is just to keep the merchandising juggernaut going, and I think it might be better served by a TV series at this point. Also, the smallest drop in the top 10 was not Wonder Woman. She was second place, but for, shockingly, 47 meters down. What? Proving that people simply can't get enough of sharks and cheese. Cheesy sharks? It's hard to think of something more American. And then the biggest drop, though, was All Eyes on Me, showing that such fare is still niche and that more mainstream inclusive picks like Straight Outta Compton, Hidden Figures, Get Out, and the upcoming Black Panther are the real future of diverse entertainment. We'll see about Black Panther, though. It's already being co-opted by special interest groups already, like months out, where it didn't happen with Wonder Woman until after she was a hit her opening weekend. So I get a little bit worried about how that could shape people's opinion of the film and whether or not they feel welcome seeing it, outside of, the black audience. All right, so anyway, on that note, let's head over to the specialty market, where some very exciting things are happening. Both The Big Sick and Beguiled were opened properly. As I said, either you open wide or you open in 4 or 5 theaters. None of this couple hundred theaters crap, because it never works out. And sure enough, opening in 5 and 4 theaters, they got very nice per theater averages, which made for wonderful headlines. The Big Sick is already looking like a rom-com hit, and the male lead is Pakistani. Wow, that's a big deal. That's not just big for diversity, getting a new group on the board, right? All the time we talk about diversity, and everyone's like, it's not just all about representation for the black community. What about the Latino community, the Asian community, the Middle Eastern community, right? And here it's happening. And on that, and with that in mind, this is also very helpful and important, I think, with the current political climate, world climate. So Kumail Nanjiani and Aziz Ansari are certainly forging historic ground for Hollywood and pop culture. It's very exciting stuff. This is also huge for Amazon, hot off of Manchester by the Sea, and should show Netflix that maybe they too should release their films just theatrically first before debuting them on streaming. It can still be exclusive. You can have a shorter, release window, but Amazon's only in theaters first strategy is working. Because, Okja comes out on, or Okaya, there's some, in the movie they pronounce it different ways, so it's frustrating. But, even the title, Netflix is like, we should have nailed that down. But anyway, that comes out on Wednesday on streaming, and it plays in just a handful of iPic theaters. No other theaters will play it. If that doesn't do well, because it's a fabulous movie, I reviewed it on Friday, that'll be Netflix's fault. It'll be totally their fault. And their logo will then become a scarlet letter when they walk around film festivals in the future trying to get acquisitions. As for The Beguiled, it is crazy, speaking of film festivals, what Cannes did for that movie. It goes from, they showed me the whole movie in the trailer, which was a common criticism I saw of the trailers before Cannes. But then, now everyone's like, well, it's the second time only that a woman has ever won Best Director at Cannes. Maybe I should see it. Cannes hasn't helped a movie like this since Blue is the Warmest Color, only Beguiled is far more commercial, with big names in front of and behind the camera. We got a Coppola here. Not to mention, it's not a very hard sell. Oh, do you want me to see a glossy, elegant, sexed-up horror film? Okay. I actually am now kind of interested in the movie myself. As for this coming weekend, Despicable Me 3 is expected to be the biggest opening yet for the trilogy and might even make Minions money, which is a spin-off. Illumination, by the way, Minions is the very first movie from Illumination to make $1 billion, to join the $1 billion club, but Despicable Me 2 came awfully close, so Despicable Me 3 could be their second $1 billion picture. These openings, though, no matter what happens in the long run, are Pixar level. Not even Disney Animation can open like this, maybe Frozen 2, but that's really a big deal. And DreamWorks Animation, by the way, used to open like this, but doesn't anymore. And of course, DreamWorks Animation, their last movie, Captain Underpants, that was their last one at Fox. Now they're going to Universal. They're going to be step siblings with Illumination over there. And perhaps the in-house competition will fuel a DreamWorks Animation renaissance, just as Disney Animation versus Pixar created the second Disney Animation renaissance. Then Will Ferrell is set to have his lowest debut since Land of the Frickin' Lost. Maybe Amy Poehler is dragging him down, and that wouldn't be, out of the question. But maybe Mark Wahlberg should also be very scared for Daddy's Home too. And then Edgar Wright looks to rally post Ant-Man with his biggest stateside debut yet. See, Phil Lord and Chris Miller? There's hope for life in Hollywood after a humiliating firing. Although your firing was so much worse than Edgar Wright's, your follow-up project will have to be that much hotter. Because I'd say Baby Driver is hot like a toasty blanket. It's not really making anyone jump up and down just yet. So that's the weekend box office. Share your thoughts down below, not only about the weekend numbers, but what you saw this past weekend, what you're planning to see this coming weekend, and also what you think about domestic versus foreign box office. What do you think of the current situation? Where do you think it's potentially heading with that China drop for Transformers the last night? Again, thanks always for watching, and you can check out some more videos right now.